Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, good evening or good morning for those of you coming from the other side of the world. My name is Eleftheria Fiji. As you heard, I'm UECNA secretary, and on behalf of the rest of the board, I would like to welcome you to the new series of webinars we are organizing for 2024. With the majority of flights being short to medium distance, rail travel's potential remains largely untapped. There is an ongoing debate about replacing short-haul flights with international trains, but how do they compare? Studies suggest that rail transport can be a competitive alternative to flights on routes that take a few hours, particularly direct connections. It is certainly relevant as most major European cities offer a vast number of train connections already, and Europe's high-speed rail network is set to grow 10% every year over the next decade. So how can you compare trains versus planes and determine the best choice for you as a traveler? There are many questions to be answered to help you choose, such as routes. Can you actually get from place A to place B? Speed. What is the actual time spent from A to B? Travel cost. Train or planes? Cost. Which is cheaper? Environment. Which option is more environmental friendly? For the last question, the research looked at actual Eurostar loadings, power consumption, and electricity sources, actual aircraft loadings and fuel consumption, and so on. The conclusion was remarkable. Taking the train instead of flying cuts you CO2 emissions by staggering 19%. Our new president of UECNA, Mr. John Stewart, which most of you know by now, has spent 20 years as the chair of HACAN, the community campaign which gives a voice to residents under the Heathrow flight paths. Mr. Stewart had a long career working in public sector before becoming involved in aviation campaigning. He has published many articles on noise and the book Why Noise Matters, which will speak to us. He will speak to us tonight about the replacement of short-haul flights by trains. Dear John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Eleftheria, and good to see people again, and good to see some new faces. How we'll do this is I'll talk for a relatively short period of time, and then there'll be, as ever, time for questions and discussion, and we aim to finish in about an hour's time. So I'm going to do a PowerPoint presentation and share my screen. Wouter, because I've made you host, you need to enable me to share my own screen. If not, I can just make myself host again. Yeah, I'll do that. And then we can share the screen. Okay. As Eleftheria said, I'm going to be talking about the potential of rail to replace short-haul flights, or at least to replace a proportion of short-haul flights. When I was doing research for this, what struck me was there are challenges for this to happen, but there are also opportunities. And I want to go through those challenges and opportunities today. But first of all, I've started with this photograph, which might be quite a strange one to start with. But I think many of us are affected by aircraft noise. Others of us are concerned about emissions from planes or air pollution. And we sometimes, I think, forget that cheap flights have brought benefits to ordinary working people. Many of you will be like me and remember the days when ordinary people couldn't afford to travel abroad. Cheap flights changed all that. And they now can provide affordable holidays in the sun for working people. And if you come from a country like the UK, lots of people want a holiday in the sun. So that's an advantage that has been brought. Also, these days, if your family is in another continent, it's possible to visit them from time to time. I remember when some of my relatives emigrated to Australia and Canada 30, 40, 50 years ago. That was it. We rarely saw them again because of the cost of travel. Cheap flights has changed that. It's also enabled ordinary people on average incomes to see more of the world. In days gone by, it was only the richer people who could travel across the world and experience different cultures. It also enabled trade. So, well, I'm going to talk about the advantages of moving from short-haul flights to rail. I think it's important that we recognize that for ordinary people, cheap flights have brought real benefits to their lives. And more people will want to enjoy those benefits. It's estimated that at present, only about 5% of the world's population has ever flown. That figure is a little bit inexact because some of the countries don't count the people too well, but certainly less than 10% of the world's population have ever flown. As people in places like Africa and parts of Asia become wealthier, they will want to fly. They will want to enjoy the benefits that ordinary people in the rich world have right now. So we are liable to see an increase in flights. The question, I think, for us is whether some of those short-haul flights can feasibly be transferred to rail. I think most of us would recognize that if you're traveling long distances, you're traveling from Europe to Asia, to Japan, to Australia, to South America, the chances are people will fly. But for short-haul flights, for shorter distance flights, there are clear environmental advantages of switching from plane to train. And that might be particularly important if many more people are able to afford to travel, people who live in the emerging economies of the world who can't yet afford to travel. So switching to train for short distance flights could be important, particularly given the environmental advantages of rail. I'm going to go through them in detail in a minute, but just to go through the bullet points right here. Rail has, as Eleftheria said, significantly lower climate change emissions than air. It causes less noise problems, not no noise problems, as we'll see, but less noise problems. And if there's a switch from short-haul flights to rail, certainly at some airports, there's the potential for fewer planes flying over the different communities. So let's look at the environmental situation one item at a time. That chart, I think, is quite dramatic. It's very clear that there is a noticeable difference between the climate change emissions emitted by rail and those emitted by air. Noise. This is a chart from the World Health Organization, or it's based on work by the World Health Organization. And it's clear that people get annoyed much more by air than they do by road or they do by rail. However, there are some caveats to this. While trains on the whole are quieter than planes, and trains do cause fewer noise complaints than planes, trains, particularly high-speed trains, are not quiet. The speed of high-speed trains does cause noise and vibration. And if we're going to talk about more high-speed trains, and I'll show in a minute that high-speed trains are probably needed in order to compete with air. If we're going to talk about more high-speed trains, in my view, that requires noise mitigation measures, such as tunnels being built to avoid the noise from going to nearby properties. And I think also there would need to be a daily limit on the number of high-speed trains passing any one community. So that's the environmental situation. The question now is, can trains compete with air? There are two key factors. One is time, and the other is cost. And I'm going to look at each of them in turn. Let's look at time, first of all, how long the journey takes. The European Union, as Eleftheria said, has ambitious plans to increase the proportion of trips up to 500 kilometers made by rail. At present, for most trips of less than 300 kilometers, train is actually quicker if you include the waiting times at airports and the time it often takes to get to an airport. But that's not the case at present for trips of 500 kilometers. If we are going to get more of a switch for those longer trips, rail does need to be speeded up. Some people argue that the EU is not being ambitious enough in aiming for a switch from air to rail for just 500 kilometers. They argue that it could be longer. But for this presentation, I've stuck with the EU 500 kilometer distance, because there's a lot of research that they've done which I am drawing on in this presentation. Essentially, what they're saying is if we're to get more people to switch from air to rail for distances of around 500 kilometers, it requires two things: faster trains and more coordination between countries. And in the next few slides, I'll look at that. Now, you may not be able to see the detail of this slide. It doesn't matter too much. It's from the EU, and what it's showing is the speed of trains right now between places that are 500 kilometers or around 500 kilometers apart. The only thing that we need to really look at is the deep red lines, the dark red lines. Those are the only lines where at present trains travel at more than 150 kilometers per hour. And there's very few of them if you look here, and they tend to be in particular countries: Italy, very much so, Spain, and France. And there's a few more as well. But overall, trains in Europe are really quite slow. And what the EU research suggests is that they need to speed up if we are to attract people to switch from air to trains. And again, the chart here is the detail you may not be able to see, but I will explain it to you. If trains travel, the EU has found, at a speed of at least 160 kilometers per hour, then there's the possibility, and perhaps even the reality, of a much more significant switch from air to rail. At present, on that first column, only for flights of 500 kilometers, of around 500 kilometers, only 20% of those distances are quicker by trains. If trains traveled at a speed of at least 160 kilometers per hour, then nearly 40% of the distances between of 500 kilometers or around 500 kilometers would be possible and likely by train. So if you speeded up the trains, you could almost double the places where people could take train rather than plane. The good news is that the EU is investing quite a lot of money, 17 billion euros in rail between 2021 and 2027. So some of this is not just a fantasy. It could well become a reality. Just a word about the special case of night flights. People will accept journeys at night which are slower. In fact, many of us quite like journeys at night which are slower. The last thing we want to do is jump on a train at 10 o'clock at night, and then it reaches its destination at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we're put off onto an empty, cold platform. So we can travel further by night flights, by night trains. And one of the, I think, most encouraging things of the last few years has been the renaissance of night trains across Europe. And if the cost is right, and I'll come to that in a minute, if the cost is right, they do provide a very real alternative to short-haul flights. So, what about cost? I refer here to a Greenpeace report. You can see the link at the bottom of the screen. And by the way, all these slides will go on the UECNA website in the next day or two, so you'll be able to see them there. So Greenpeace looked at cost, and it's quite startling right now, the difference between the cost of flights and the cost of trains. They looked at 112 fairly typical routes across Europe. And for 79 of those 112 routes, air was cheaper than rail. They found that rail trips are on average twice as expensive as flights. Again, you could look at the detail if you look at the slides when they go up on the UECNA website. What Greenpeace found is that the price of air and rail can vary a bit depending on how far in advance you book. But on average, the top figure there, on average, trains cost twice as much as planes. And if we think back to the first slide that I showed of ordinary people enjoying a holiday in the sun on the beach, if you've got a family of 3 or 4 children and you want to have a holiday maybe even just once every 2 or 3 years in the sunshine, you are going to choose, at the moment, you're probably going to choose air rather than trains because you simply can't afford the cost of the train fares. So, what's needed to change things? I think, first of all, what Greenpeace found and what other researchers have found as well is that we need to make it easier to book rail fares. It's not impossible these days, but with the internet, but there are restrictions for booking in advance that don't really exist with air. Also, there are real restrictions if you want to cross borders. And I think one of the things the EU is trying to encourage is for countries not just to think about developing rail in their own country, which some of them, like Italy, are very good at doing, but to think across borders. So, for example, a good example of this is that we have Italian trains, privately run trains, now running all the way through seamlessly from Italy to Paris and beyond. Enabling those sort of trains to run more often and enabling people to book tickets through tickets more easily is very important if we're going to get more people using railways. The second thing I would argue is that we need to look at the fact that aviation fuel is untaxed, and in most countries, there's still not a tax on tickets. And that would put up the cost of short-haul flights. At the same time, we need to look at lower rail fares. Now, I am aware that the aviation industry quite rightly would say that this is giving rail tax advantages over air. But I believe that the measures can be justified on environmental grounds. So, we're back on the beach. We're back on the beach in the sun. I think one of the things that came across to me very strongly when preparing this presentation is that for ordinary people flying, choice is critical. We don't want to return to the days when only rich people can afford to travel abroad. So the challenge is to make rail a more viable choice for people to use when they go for their holiday in the sun. And my conclusions, I believe the research from the EU and elsewhere shows that rail can be an alternative for many short-haul air trips, but it requires faster, cheaper trains. Only then will people have a realistic choice about whether they take the train or the plane. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, which is very nice because I can see you all again. And so it's now time for, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, any questions, any discussion, and feel free if you wish to put your cameras on so that I'm seeing as many attractive faces as possible. So if you would like to talk, just either raise your virtual hand or just put up your hand, and we can go into a period of discussion for the next 25 minutes or so. Yes, Michael, I'm always glad somebody starts. So I'm glad to see your hand up. Would you like to make your comment?
Okay. Everything is okay, what you say, what you said, but I missed something. The standard in the moment is that already in some countries, short-haul flights are banned.
Yeah.
I think that's another possibility to change the decision between flight and bans. If there is no short-haul fly, it's the only possibility to take the car or the rail. I think that we should not forget, yeah, and we should, because there's something which acts on the European political level, and that's always a little bit restricted by the power relation which is in the European Parliament and in the other European institutions. And then there is the pressure from the bottom. Yeah, that's very, very necessary. Yeah, and maybe it's in the beginning. Okay, but I want to stop, but because before I don't come to another possibility to speak, I want to show you this button. We still have this button of ban short-haul flies. We still have 80 pieces of this.
Right.
Night flight bans too. If someone want to have this it's in English. We have it only in German and English. He just send me a mail, and we will send you some without codes. Yeah, please don't forget it, because some of you still have a car, for instance, or something else, and they can put it on it. Thank you.
Brilliant, Michael. Thank you very much. Yes, you're absolutely right to remind me about the fact that some countries have restricted or banned short-haul flights for certain distances. France has done some, I think Austria as well. And then that is, that is, as you say, very, very definite. People simply cannot fly.
I would like to make a remark exactly on this topic because I live in France.
Yes, on you go, Alex.
Yeah, hi. It's my first meeting in this group now, so yes, I live in France in Nantes, and the short haul flights which were banned, it's just we must say it's a political scam. It's just it's a folk how is it called?
Folklore.
Sorry?
It's a folklore. You're saying it's a scam.
Yeah, because you know how many flights were banned in the end, or which disappeared?
Very few, isn't it?
Three connections were deleted in whole France. And it was big on the news that France forbids. My colleagues in Germany, I work for a German company, they said, yeah, in France, you forbid short-haul flights. I said, no, it's only 3. And even 2 of those connections were not served anymore. These were sleeping connections by France. The one which was definitely suppressed is Nantes, Paris, Orly, I think. But every morning at 6:10, Nantes Charles de Gaulle takes off. And that's because of the loops in how the law was formulated. It's not only about the distance or more the time, it's I think 2 hours 45.
Yeah.
The train must be going, but it's also the connections. If it's a connection to another flight, you cannot suppress this with back. And there are a few more exceptions which were put in the end. Practically nothing was suppressed.
Alex, that's very interesting. Yes, because there was a lot of it was highlighted big time certainly in the UK press about what's happening in France, and I had heard that it wasn't nearly as dramatic as I've been to Nantes many times, and I've always taken the train from Paris, and it's not a long journey, but very, very interesting what you just said there.
There's one more condition which prevented suppression of flights, which also touches what in your presentation, what you said, replacing it with trains. One condition was that the stay at place when you arrive to another city must be at least 8 hours. So it means you must leave your hometown, you go by train, let's say to Paris, and there must be a return train to your hometown 8 hours later minimum. So kind of it's a working day they want to guarantee.
Right.
And often the return trains, the last one doesn't go late enough. Such little details.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because the as we say in English, the devil's often in the detail. Yeah, absolutely. Right, I think I'll take the hands in the order that I think they went up. So Dominique, I think you're next. Yes. And there might be a follow-up actually from what Alex was saying.
Yes, in fact, Alex said almost what I wanted to say. I think John said the presentation was very instructive. I think that unfortunately false. The bill doesn't go as far as
Dominique, your connection is not terribly good. We're not hearing. It's loud enough, but it's not clear. So we're not really making out what you're saying. Try again. Shall I go on to Elevathera while Dominique's maybe try again, Dominique, and see how.
Me?
No.
No, you can't hear me.
That's better. That's better. Yeah.
Okay. No. So what I was saying is that Alex said almost what I wanted to say. That the number of flights banned is so little compared to what it should have been if the Convention of Citizens had been listened and their decision had been followed by political decisions. You have a distance between Paris and Marseille, as just checked. It's just under 800 kilometers, and by train it's 3 hours and 30 minutes. So it's a very short train travel for a long distance by road or even by air, and the price is not so expensive. And it's so much more convenient than air. So we're talking distances, saying maybe we should have ban air for a certain distance. In fact, when you talk about travel time, maybe it's more interesting than talking about distance, because it's really what you want, a short travel time, and you can have it with a fast train. And as you say, we must invest in faster trains and faster rail lines to get that, to obtain that.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Travel time is the key thing. The other thing which you mentioned there, Dominique, is convenience. Because sometimes if it's more convenient to take the train, you're prepared to spend a little bit longer on it, simply because you don't have to change or what have you. But convenience is terribly important, as long as the cost is right, and particularly if you've got families, particularly if you've got children. You don't want to have you want to make it as convenient as possible. Elefthera, I think your hand was next, and then I will go along the row of hands.
Yes, John, it's not really a question. It is an observation. In one of the slides you saw, we saw that the Eastern Europe, at least from Austria and the Eastern countries and ours, there is no railroad network which would be over 90, I think, kilometers per hour. So maybe Europe should invest in these countries' railroad network, so we can enjoy the things that you can in the rest of the Europe, because recently we had a rail accident in Greece. Maybe some of you have heard about it, which was has literally cut Greece in two parts. So rail travel stopped in our country for several months, and we cannot travel, for example, to France with a train without making a trip for maybe days, because we can come here there by plane in a few hours, but we would need days to come in France or go to Germany. So maybe someone should think about it.
No, it's an interesting point, and I don't know really what the latest from the EU is, whether the money that they're spending, whether they are prioritizing countries where the rail system is not good. Certainly in years gone by, before, when they were giving money to build roads and motorways, they tended to prioritize the old Eastern European countries. Now, whether they're doing the same with rail, I don't know, but it seems to me a very good idea if they are.
It's not only for travel, you know. It's only for it is also for trade, because here we have a port, a really important port for Europe, which is a gate from Eastern Europe and China, and I think that goods cannot come easily to the rest of the Europe if we don't have an alternative way.
No, it's a very good point. I mean, I know in the UK that a lot more freight could go on rail than actually does, and that therefore takes freight both the roads and potentially from air as well. That is a very good point. Friedman, I think you were next.
Okay, thanks. I wanted to add to your hard facts. You said there are two hard facts, time and cost for the choice for the majority. I would add a soft factor, means the social attitude of flying. So when you talk with people and they would have the choice to go by train to, let's say, to northern Italy, to the Mediterranean, they would look at you and said, "Hey, are you crazy? You can use the plane." I would call sometimes it's more sexy to go by plane than to go by train. Train is an old-fashioned transport medium, and it's even when the hard facts are positive and we know the climate impact, which is on cost and time, it's a fourth factor. It's still in the mind of a lot of people, of millions of people, the majority, that going by plane is more it's more modern, and it gives you a social benefit to your friend, to a factor. So there has to be also a change in the attitude of people on the transport medium. That's that I wanted to mention, which is not unimportant.
It is important. And the thought that strikes me there, I don't know what your thought or anybody else's thought is on this.
Okay.
Is I'm not sure that the railways until recently have been very good at selling themselves.
Okay.
The aviation has been very, very good at selling itself. And I think the railways have been a little bit complacent. Perhaps they felt that they could never compete with air, and so I think it may be changing, ironically, with some of the private companies which are coming in, who do seem to be able to sell themselves a lot better. I've just forgotten the name of the Italian high-speed private company.
I know that. Yeah. It's very profitable, and it's very good accepted.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, Ivana, absolutely right.
Nobody would fly from Rome to Milan normally, so
No.
that's really a good success. This is a very good example. Yeah.
And it sells. And it sells itself well. It markets itself well. And I'm just wondering if the rail industry needs, across Europe more generally, particularly perhaps the more traditional companies, need to learn how to market themselves. It's just a thought. Yeah.
That's what's one point. The second point is just beside from or ban for short haul flights or a political decision, there also needs to be convinced the companies. We have made 2 years ago with 200 companies here in Frankfurt a letter, and got some answers, and there are even a lot of companies now in this sample which have already decided to ban short-haul domestic flights within Germany. So this is one of the items we can influence. We can work also on that let's say decision makers, which they are looking for cost and time.
Yes,
even more than a tourist person.
That's right. This is companies saying to their employees, we have a policy of either not flying or flying only when it's essential meetings. Yeah.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you very much. Right. The screen keeps moving, and I've forgotten who go next. But Berto, on you go. I think your hand's been up for a while.
Thank you. I think distance is not a good criterion for the sensible for the meaningfulness of rail, but time it is. The fastest train in Europe has an average speed of 200 kilometers. You need for 600 kilometers 3 hours. For a flight, you need at least 4 hours, because in Germany you should be 2 hours before departure at the airport. 1 hour for the flight itself, and 1 hour you need for waiting for your baggage. And then you are at the airport and not in the city. Train is meaningful also for longer distances. If you have a transfer flight, you can calculate a time of at least 6 hours. And you should also consider that train is more comfortable. You have typically in the high-speed trains WLAN. You have a restaurant car with better wine than in the plane. The wine in the German restaurant cars are really good. And so the time doesn't not matter so much. And so also traveling by train over 1,000 kilometers is meaningful. We have gone from Edinburgh to Frankfurt some years ago with train in one day. It was a nice journey. Another problem is that if you use travel portals, you doesn't get information about rail connections. You get only flight connections, and this should be changed. The travel portals should informs also über rail connections, so that the people can see that train is faster and in some cases also cheaper. And further critical problem are the passenger rights. In the case if you change the from train to rail, you have no passenger rights if your train is late. If you have a flight ticket with transfer at a hub, you have the right to use the next plane. And this is a great advantage. So you have no risk that you lose your paid ticket if your plane is too late. And there should do the European Commission a change. And I think this is very important. The passenger rights, if you change the kind of traffic.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Bertel. There's some really, really useful points there and well-made points, which perhaps I didn't have time to cover, but they really are very well made. You know, for example, the fact it's more difficult to get refunds from train tickets and plane tickets and so on. Very well made. And I particularly liked the point you made about the wine. I think the criteria we have to go for now is forget about the cost and the time. What is the wine like on the trains and the planes? That should be our criteria in the future. Listen, Andrea, I think you're next, then Debbie, and then Alex is going to stand up.
Okay, thank you so much. So I'm Andrea Iwaszewska from Airport Regions Council from Brussels. And my comments connects more or less the all point of views what I heard previously. Maybe you've already heard about what I will share with you. My very, very positive experience when I needed to go lastly from Brussels to Amsterdam. So previously, especially before COVID, it was a nightmare for me when I needed to fly because actually the flying hours was just half an hour, but I needed to go to the airport more hours before. But last year, I needed to travel on a private basis to Bali. I took KLM and I departed from Schiphol. And I was so surprised that when I bought the ticket, it was offered me a combined ticket, a train, a rail, and flight ticket. And it was great for me because I didn't need to go to Zaventem I needed to go to Midi station. It is much closer to the city in Brussels. I didn't need to arrive 2-3 hours before the departure, just 20 minutes before. And in addition, I could check in already in Midi station. So after I had arrived in Schiphol, I didn't need to do anything, just to go from the railway station, that is next to the Schiphol airport, to the gate and waited for the boarding hours. So it's great. And yes, the ticket involved my train ticket as well. Everything was very harmonized. I didn't need to wait more than it was actually needed. So I think this could be one of the ways for us to combine the both mode of transportations, or to change a little bit the airport usage to the rail ones. So this is what I would like to share with you.
No, thank you very much for sharing it, Andrea, because that I think it's an interesting point. And I think increasingly, some of the train companies in some countries are working with the airports in order to have that seamless journey, which you're talking about, that you can go from air to train and without too much difficulty. So that's an important contribution to the debate. Debbie, welcome all the way from the USA. You've come to find out what trains are like, yeah?
Yeah, I got an opportunity to do that because I've been trading for the last, I don't know, 20 years, 30 years. I don't take the plane at all. So I got to learn about the antiquated, kind of challenged rail system all across the US. And I would say there hasn't been much done to upgrade it or route since the 1800s when most of this track was laid. So a couple of things I wanted to mention is that when you're doing cost benefit analysis between flying and rail, the one factor that's never considered is the externalized costs of the health problems of people who live in a 10-mile area around the airports, which Zafar Zafari has thankfully looked closely at around BWI, and the tens of millions in cost annually just for health-related issues related just to noise are tremendous. So these externalized costs that airports never factor into their cost of doing business would make ticket prices much higher. Plus, you have to consider the vast amount of subsidies that go to air and don't go to rail. Like, for instance, aviation, and I think it's that love that somebody else talked about, the sexy flying, or, it's just like an elitist kind of thing where you can say, oh yes, I flew to the Bahamas for my vacation this year, or whatever. You don't get that in rail. So we've got air miles that are given back to people that, the cheap ticket is not real, because the cost to the environment and health and the damage that flying does is never figured into the cost. Traveling across country at one point, it's a 3 or 4 day trip. If you take one state out of the country, you make that trip a day shorter, where it's just it's Montana, it's pretty rural. It's just a long trip of grasses and big sky.
I'll remember not to go and visit Montana then, Debbie.
Well, not by rail. It's something you'd want to fly. You need to, but if I asked the attendant on the train, why do you have to go so slow? It's 85 miles per hour. I'm not sure what that translates into kilometers.
But it's quite, but it's slow. Yeah.
But it's slow. And they said the reason is the tracks are old. The train can go faster, but the tracks are old. So when you're talking about speeding up trains in Europe, it may be just a matter of replacing tracks, which is much less, you know, expensive than creating new routes or putting down brand new corridors where you have to absorb a lot of land. But I'm traveling across country again next week. We're going from Idaho to Florida. So I'll get to see that corridor, which I haven't seen before. But the trains in the Northeast, they're pretty full. But the one we take from the West Coast going to New York or Chicago are very empty. So you can spread out and lay down, take a whole bench. You know, there's a dining car and observation car and Wi-Fi and TV and
but listen, Debbie, the real question is, can you pass the Berthold test of what's the wine like?
Oh, the wine is probably not as excellent as what you're talking about is served because I think most of it's coming from, you know, the good stuff is coming from you guys over there. But
okay. Listen,
philosophically, John, I just want to say one thing.
Yeah.
That I don't know so much that it's trains that need to speed up as what would be good for everyone is people slow down.
Okay. Debbie, thanks as ever. Lots of insights there. So thanks very much. Alex, I think your hand is the last one up, so we'll go to yourself.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I multiplied here quickly in between.
You brought somebody else this time, Alex.
Yes, a little member here to the meeting. First, maybe just quick, Debbie, you mentioned this study on the external costs. Maybe could you post the link to the chat or send it around? I would be very interested.
Yes, I can.
Yeah, this would be very nice. Thanks.
Sorry, just before we go on, Alex, either put it in the chat, Debbie, or send it to me, and then I can send it round. But yeah, sorry, Alex, on you go.
Yeah, this would be great. Thanks. The point we talked a lot about costs and time, competition between trains and airplanes. I wonder if that's the right way to compete on a field on which airplanes is just so strong. Costs, low costs, and very short times.
Yes.
From a project management perspective, these are contradicting goals. So you cannot really reduce costs and do something faster in the other way around. So the only way to do it is usually technology breaks or breaking changes, or you compete on different fields. Maybe people don't want to be faster somewhere, but we talked. Somebody said already, like the wine, like the things that you get in the train that you cannot get on the flight. Maybe that's enough for people to decide to take the train and to take into account maybe longer travel times. I'm just thinking about the electrical cars now that they're coming up everywhere. What I've read, the manufacturers thought they need to compete against the thermal cars by distance. So with a car, you can go 800, 900 kilometers with a thermal car. So they thought they must do the same. But then they realized that people are okay to travel only maybe 400 kilometers on the battery charge, as long as the charging is short. As long as you can charge the car in 20 minutes, they would accept the 400 kilometers. So you see, you don't need to compete on the same field. So, and the night trains is another good example. They're not fast, but people still, maybe for a niche, the people accept it. So I'm just.
Alex, that's a really interesting point about whether what I was talking about, you're absolutely right, was trains competing on air's territory.
Exactly.
Actually, what you're saying is that there may be different territory, different fields where train can compete and can sell itself. That's a really interesting point. But Berthold, I think you're going to have the last word before I hand back to Elefthera. So on you go.
Yes, I think one argument for the trains should be, I will say, trains are much more flexible than planes. In Germany, you can buy a flexible ticket where you can use every train. For example, if you have a meeting in somewhere and the meeting stops earlier, you can take the next train. or if the meeting is finished later, you can take the following train, and this flexibility you don't have with a plane. And this is a very important argument for business traveler.
Thank you, Berto. Listen, just before I hand back to you, Elefthera, I just want to say that this has been a really interesting discussion. It's added so much to what I said. And I think what I'm going to try and do is not do another presentation, but to write a paper which incorporates some of what I said, but also incorporates a lot of what all of you said as well, because I think it's your contributions were excellent, and we can have a rounded paper which we'll put on the UECNA website. And so thank you so much for the discussion, because it really was a very fruitful discussion. Elefthera, I'm going to hand back to you now to wrap things up.
Thank you. Before we close, I would like to thank you all for being here tonight with us. I hope this was a fruitful discussion and a presentation. And I want to invite you all to our next webinar in 4th of March, which will be held from Matt Polman's, and it would be about balanced approach. Matt will do this speech together with someone from the Netherlands government. So we have to stay tuned, because it would be a very interesting discussion afterwards with that theme too. So I don't know if anyone wants to say something more. Otherwise, thank you. Thank you. Ευχαριστώ.
I'm sorry, I checked in too late, so I missed the presentation by John, but I'll check it on the website.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
I'll see you next time.
We will see you next time with the new theme. Thank you all. Good night.
Good night.